There was a bear alive during the last ice age that could look a 6-foot man dead in the eyes, while standing on all fours. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. We don't actually know why it went extinct. Some scientists think we killed it. Others think it starved. And a few believe something even stranger, that this animal, one of the most powerful predators to ever walk this planet, may have avoided humans on purpose. But why would the most dangerous bear that ever lived be scared of us? Its name was again.Ever. Most people have never heard of it. But roughly 11,000 years ago, this thing roamed across North America, from Alaska all the way down to Mexico, and it was built unlike anything alive today. We are talking about an animal that weighed somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 pounds. Longer legs than any bear alive, a body built for speed and distance, and a skull so powerful it could crack through bone like it was nothing. This wasn't a grizzly. This wasn't a polar bear. This was something else entirely. Something that evolution spent millions of years designing into the ultimate predator, and then, right around the time humans showed up on this continent, it vanished forever. So what really happened between us and again.Ever? And what did this creature actually think of the strange, two-legged animals that had just wandered into its world? That's what we are going to figure out today. Here's the thing that makes the story so fascinating, and so confusing. When you look at the fossil record, again.Ever had survived for over a million years. Ice ages came and went. Climate shifted. Other massive animals died off, but this bear kept going. It adapted. It endured. And then, in what is geologically speaking basically a blink of an eye, it disappeared. The timing is suspicious. Modern humans, called Paleo-Indians, crossed into North America somewhere around 13,000 to 15,000 years ago. Within a few thousand years, again.Ever was gone. And it wasn't alone. Mammoths, mastodons, short-faced lions, giant ground sloths. Almost all of North America's megafauna vanished in that same narrow window. Scientists call this a quaternary extinction event. And for decades, two camps have been fighting about what caused it. Camp 1 says it was climate change. The world was warming. The ice was retreating. Food sources were shifting. These animals just couldn't keep up. Camp 2 says it was us. Humans arrived, hunted everything, and caused a wave of extinction that wiped out dozens of species in a matter of thousands of years. But here's where again.Ever breaks both theories, because neither one fits perfectly when you actually look at the evidence. Before we get into what killed it, you need to understand what this animal actually was. Because most people picture a bear and immediately think of the ones we have today: black bears, brown bears, polar bears. again.Ever was not that. Paleontologists call it the short-faced bear, which is a bit of a misleading name. Yes, its face was shorter and more flat compared to modern bears. But that's almost the least interesting thing about it. Let's start with the size. The largest grizzly bears on record top out around 800 pounds for a really big male. Polar bears can push 1,500 pounds in extreme cases. again.Ever, based on bone measurements and body mass calculations, likely average between 1,500 and 1,800 pounds, and the biggest specimens may have pushed past 2,000. To put that in perspective, if you put a grizzly bear and again.Ever next to each other, the short-faced bear would make the grizzly look like a medium-sized dog. But the weight isn't even the most unsettling part. Modern bears are built kind of compact and round. again.Ever had long, almost horse-like legs. Its limbs were proportionally longer than any bear alive today. Researchers have estimated that it could cover ground at speeds of up to 40 miles per hour, roughly as fast as a racehorse. Think about that for a second. An animal that weighed as much as a small car, moving as fast as a racehorse. And when it stood on its hind legs, estimates put it at around 11 to 12 feet tall. That's not a misprint. 12 feet. Standing upright, it would tower over most door frames and be looking down at second-story windows. Now here's where scientists started arguing. For a long time, people assumed again.Ever was a hypercarnivore, basically a killing machine that hunted and ate only meat. The skull structure, the powerful bite, the long legs of chasing prey. It all seemed to point toward a predator at the very top of the food chain. Some researchers even theorized it was a kleptoparasite, which is a fancy word for an animal that steals food from other predators. The idea was that again.Ever was so big and intimidating that it could simply walk up to a pack of wolves or saber-toothed cat that had just made a kill and take the whole thing for itself. Which honestly, if you're the size of a pickup truck and can run 40 miles per hour, seems like a pretty solid strategy. But then isotope analysis started complicating everything. Scientists can study the chemical signatures in fossil bones, specifically ratios of different carbon and nitrogen isotopes, to get a rough idea of what an animal was eating. And when they ran these tests on again.Ever specimens from across North America, the results were all over the place. Some populations seemed to be eating mostly meat. Others showed signatures more consistent with plant-based diets. Some were right in the middle. This led to a newer theory that again.Ever was actually an omnivore, more like a supersized version of today's grizzly, eating whatever was available depending on the season and the region. berries, roots, fish, carrion, fresh kills, all of it. If that's true, it changes the whole picture of what this animal's daily life looked like. And it changes how we should think about its relationship with the humans who showed up on its turf. So the scene is set. It's roughly 13,000 years ago. North America is still partially covered in glacier in the north, but the central and southern parts of the continent are teeming with life. Mammoths roam in herds. Giant ground sloths move slowly through forests. American horses. Yes, horses actually evolved in North America, graze across open plains. And again.Ever is somewhere near the top of all of it. Then the Paleo-Indians arrive. These were not the humans you might imagine if you're picturing ancient, primitive people stumbling around with sticks. These were anatomically modern humans. Same brain size as us. Same problem-solving capacity. Same ability to communicate in complex language, work together in groups, and, most crucially, make and use tools. They had weapons, spears with finely crafted stone tips, called clovis points, that archaeologists have found all across North America. These points were sharp enough and heavy enough to bring down large animals. And now imagine, these humans are moving through a landscape for the very first time. They've never seen a mammoth before. They've never seen a giant ground sloth. And somewhere out in that landscape, they encounter something that would have stopped even the bravest person dead in their tracks. A bear the size of a car, standing 12 feet tall. What happened in that moment? What did again.Ever do when it first encountered a human? Here is where the story gets genuinely strange, and it's the question that researchers still don't have a clean answer to. There's a theory, and it's a serious one supported by some paleontologists, that again.Ever may have actually been afraid of humans, or at least, cautious of them in a way that modern large predators aren't. The reasoning goes like this. again.Ever evolved over millions of years alongside other megafauna. It had learned, through generations of trial and error baked into its instincts, how other large animals behaved. It knew how mammoths moved. It knew how other predators hunted. Its whole survival strategy was calibrated for that world. Then humans showed up, and humans were completely unlike anything it had ever encountered. We moved in groups. We made noise. We used fire, which is something that almost universally disturbs large predators. We threw objects from a distance, which violates every rule of how predators and prey were supposed to work. Everything about us was strange and unpredictable. Some researchers argue that this unpredictability might have actually caused again.Ever to avoid human camps and human groups, at least initially. And there's a flip side to this theory that's even more interesting, because the Paleo-Indians, on their side, would have been encountering again.Ever for the first time too. And unlike the megafauna that evolved alongside this bay, animals that had thousands of generations of instinct telling them how to react to it, the humans had nothing. No ancestral memory of again.Ever, no ingrained fear response. Which means they may have approached it the same way they approached everything else in this new land, as a potential food source, or as a threat to be neutralized. And that changes everything. Let's talk about the most uncomfortable possibility. The overkill hypothesis. The idea that humans hunted North America's megafauna to extinction was first seriously proposed by paleontologist Paul Martin in the 1960s. And it's never really gone away, because the timing is just too hard to ignore. Humans arrive. Megafauna disappear. Over and over, on continent after continent. You see the same pattern in the fossil record. In Australia, megafauna started disappearing around 46,000 years ago, right when humans arrived there. In North America, the timeline lines up almost perfectly with the Clovis culture spreading across the continent. On islands like Madagascar and New Zealand, where humans arrived much later, the local megafauna disappeared right on cue, thousands of years after the mainland extinctions. The pattern is hard to explain away. But here's the problem when it comes to again.Ever specifically. Where are the kill sites? For mammoths, we have actual archaeological evidence of human hunting. Clovis points found embedded in mammoth bones. Kill sites where carcasses were butchered. The evidence exists. For again.Ever, almost nothing. There are no confirmed again.Ever kill sites associated with human artifacts. No bones with tool marks. No campfires surrounded by short-faced bear remains. Either humans were incredibly efficient at hunting it and left almost no trace, or they mostly didn't hunt it at all. And some scientists think the answer is the second one. That again.Ever didn't die because humans killed it. It died because humans killed everything else, and left the bear with nothing to eat. The starvation theory. This is called the cascade extinction theory, and it's maybe the most haunting explanation of all. Here's how it works. again.Ever, whether it was a hypercarnivore or an omnivore, depended on a rich ecosystem to survive. In a world packed with mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, horses, and camels. Yes, camels lived in North America. There was always something to eat. There was always a carcass to scavenge, always prey available, always enough calories for an animal that needed to consume an enormous amount just to keep its massive body alive. Now remove all of that. If Paleo-Indian hunters systematically overhunted the megafauna, Not necessarily even intentionally, but just because they were skilled hunters in a land where animals had never learned to fear humans, the whole food web starts to collapse. The mammoths go, the horses go, the ground sloths go, and Arctidus simus, that magnificent, terrifying, impossible animal, doesn't die from a spear. It slowly starves. Its range shrinks as prey disappears. Its population drops. And eventually, somewhere in a cave or on a hillside, the last one dies, not from a wound, but from hunger. That's not a war story. That's a tragedy. Imagine the last Arctidus simus. We don't know where it died. We don't know when exactly. Somewhere around 11,000 years ago is the best estimate. We don't know if it was a male or a female. We don't know if it had cubs. What we do know is that by the time it died, the world it was born into had already completely changed. The animals it shared the continent with were gone. The herds it had hunted or scavenged from had vanished. The ecosystem that supported its enormous body was unraveling in ways nothing could stop. Did it understand any of that? Of course not. Not in a way we'd recognize as understanding. But animals know hunger. They know when prey is hard to find. They know when their range feels emptier than it used to. Whether Arctidus had anything like a sense of its world shrinking, we'll never know. What we do know is that somewhere around 11,000 years ago, no more short-faced bays were born, and the bones that remained slowly turned to stone, buried under layers of sediment, waiting thousands of years to be found and puzzled over by the descendants of the very species that may have contributed to their end. Paleontologists are still actively studying Arctidus simus, and the science keeps shifting. In 2017, a study used geometric morphometrics, basically super detailed 3D analysis of skull shapes, to argue that Arctidus simus was more closely related to South American spectacled bays than previously thought, which completely reshuffled the family tree. More recent isotope studies have kept pushing back against the pure carnivore model, suggesting regional populations adapted differently depending on what food was available. A short-faced bay in Alaska eating salmon during a glacial run looked metabolically different from one in the American Southwest surviving on plants and occasional scavenge kills. This is actually a sign of intelligence and adaptability, not a sign of a mindless killing machine. An animal that can adjust its diet across that range is a smart animal, a flexible one, which makes the extinction even harder to wrap your head around. This wasn't a hyper-specialized predator that collapsed the moment its one food source disappeared. This was an adaptable, intelligent, powerful animal that had survived for over 1 million years across radically different environments. And it still couldn't survive what happened at the end of the Pleistocene. So what did Arctidus simus really think of us? Honestly, we don't know. We can speculate based on behavior patterns in modern bays, based on what we know about predator-prey dynamics, based on the fossil record and what it does and doesn't show us. But we can't climb inside the mind of an animal that's been dead for 11,000 years. What we can say is this: the relationship between humans and Arctidus simus, whatever it looked like, ended with one of them still here. We survived. We spread. We built cities and wrote books and eventually started digging up the bones of the animals we shared a continent with for a few thousand years. And Arctidus simus became a name in a scientific paper. A skull in a museum case. A creature that most people alive today have never heard of. The short-faced bear didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because the world changed faster than it could keep up with. And at least some of that change, maybe most of it, came from us. That's worth sitting with for a moment. We didn't just inherit this planet. In some very real sense, we helped shape which other species got to stay on it. The bones of Arctidus simus are still out there, still being found, still being studied, still giving up new secrets to the scientists patient enough to look. And every new fossil is another piece of a story that started long before us and ended, maybe, because of us. If this kind of deep animal history is what you're into, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.